Nothing captures the imagination quite like contemplating the stars on a clear night. In ancient times, we looked to the stars to make sense of ourselves and our lives. Astrology looks into the vast expanse of space to find meaning, purpose, and wisdom. Join APM, that's me, your intrepid star guide, on this cosmic journey as they explore through astrology the mantra of the Delphic Oracle. Know thyself, and I know the cosmos. Hello and welcome, star people. This is the Outlaw Astrology Podcast. This is Season 7, Episode 11, and this is APM, your intrepid star guide. We're going to be talking about the four phases of Mercury. So I bet you didn't know that Mercury also has phases. Now, some of you who've been into astrology for longer and studying longer and practicing longer probably already know this. But for those of you beginners and intermediates out there, it may not be common knowledge. It's something you get into once you sorted out how to interpret charts in your own unique and special way. So there are indeed four phases, two major and two sub-phases. And that's what we're going to talk about on this particular podcast episode. Before we do that, some housekeeping. If you like my Astro Flow, please feel free to like, subscribe, review, give us 5 stars on Apple, iTunes, and Spotify in particular, or wherever you listen to podcasts. There is a sibling newsletter called Outlaw Astrology's The Daily Stargazer, in which there are hundreds at this point, at least over, it's hundreds, okay, we're moving into hundreds, people, of posts. We have a free and paid version, and the link will be in the show notes as usual. And now on with the show. So, Mercury phases are very simple. There are two major. There is promethean and epimethean. And both are either direct or retrograde. And they give a bit more of a spin, a flavor to your Mercury placement. And that Mercury placement, of course, it does not exist in isolation. It has a tendency to exist alongside the rest of your chart. So your Mercury may be your chart ruler, your shot caller, or it may be connected to your sun, as in very strongly aligned with, or it may be having chats with quite a few other planets in your chart, or it may be the sole dispositor, meaning the last planet standing once you bounce from each planet and go from Venus. So the 12th house is ruled by Venus, and where is Venus? And is Venus in Cancer? We're going to look at the moon, etc. So it could be the sole dispositor, or it could also be involved in a aspect pattern, or it could be the lead planet in a stellium, or it also could be, everywhere you want to be in the chart. So Mercury is about our intellect, about our communication level, and it has an affinity with the 3rd house and also the 6th house, because traditionally those are the houses that are related to Gemini 3rd and Virgo 6th. Okay, so these phases basically can influence and also flavor how that Mercury may operate. So we're going to start first with the Promethean phase. And the Promethean phase of Mercury is, well, it's kind of, I'd say, a little on the complicated side. Not terribly complicated, but a little on the complicated side. So it has to do with Mercury and its alignment with the Sun. So the first thing a student of astrology will learn is that Mercury is, well, it's unique. Its orbit lies outside the Earth, so it's never more than about 28 zodiacal degrees from the Sun. And from our vantage point here on Earth, and because the Earth never passes between Mercury and the Sun, Mercury doesn't make entire 360-degree cycle aspects with the Sun. Okay, so these factors create a very unique situation when we characterize the planets lying inside Earth's orbit. That would be Venus and Mercury. And so instead of forming a single conjunction and a single opposition with the Sun during each cycle, Mercury and also Venus have two different types. It's called an inferior and a superior conjunction. And that's how Mercury obviously does that. So it always appears near the Sun in the sky and it never enters into an opposition because it's not far enough away from the Sun to do that. So they form two types of geocentric conjunctions with the Sun during each cycle. An inferior conjunction, which is the beginning of a new cycle, where the inner planet is retrograde and passing between Earth and the Sun, and a superior conjunction is when the inner planet is fastest in its geocentric motion, and it's on the opposite side of the Sun, meaning it's on the other side of the solar system. And so Mercury is retrograde before and after the inferior conjunction, and that's in its Sun-centered conjunction, and it is direct during the superior conjunction when it's on the other side of the Sun. Okay, so it's a 116-day cycle, and it begins with an inferior conjunction, and this basically is where the Sun, Mercury, and the Earth are aligned. That's what conjunctions mean astronomically. It's when all of these planets will be aligned on one side of the solar system, and an opposition would be when an outer planet and the inner planets, including the Earth, in proximity to the Sun, tend to be on the other side of the solar system. Okay, so the Sun, Mercury, and Earth are aligned, and Mercury is standing between the Sun and Earth, and it occupies about in the middle of that 20 to 24 day retrograde period. And the inferior conjunction is the herald of Mercury's waxing, what is known as a hemicycle, and it is analogous to a period between the new and the full moon, basically. So because this cycle opens with Mercury leaping from setting behind the Sun in the west to rising before the Sun in the east in the morning sky, we call this promethean. And that is by Prometheus, was a mythological titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans so that humans could have the light of knowledge, which is what the Olympians did not want them to have. And for this, they were punished by having themselves tied to a rock face and having their liver eaten out by one of Zeus's eagles every day, only to have it grow back in the evening and have that cycle continue, or be eaten again every day and then grow back in the evening. And it's continued on until Chiron sacrificed themselves so that Prometheus could be freed. And that's eventually what happens. Chiron goes on to be a constellation, and Prometheus is freed from their torment. Okay, so Mercury turns direct about 9 to 15 days after an inferior conjunction, and about a week after Mercury reaches its furthest distance from the Sun. A few days after that, Mercury begins to move through the zodiac quicker than the Sun, and it's about a degree a day, and this is called a superior conjunction. And it occurs when Mercury is on the far side of the Sun. Okay? So that's at which point this part of the cycle, which is the waning part of the cycle, is called epimethean. So the promethean phase starts with Mercury in an inferior conjunction. This is considered the waxing phase of Mercury, and starts with the retrograde phase. And so let's discuss some personality traits one might find with that Promethean phase. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll discuss that in a bit. So what I wanted to do first was to say, hey, let's find your Mercury, let's find your Prometheus, all that sort of thing. It's easy to find and easy to discover, but we're going to go first with personality traits of the Promethean retrograde, and then we will go on from there. So for Promethean retrograde types, these are people seeking independence. They don't like to be limited. They do not like social convention and are driven to be intuitive, meaning they have an inner drive or an inner impulse. I would say, yeah, a drive would be a good word. It's kind of like new moon Aries energy. They're independent, they're courageous, they want to try new things, they don't want people on their back whispering into their ears and chewing their ear off with advice. They want to do their own thing, they want to stretch into novelty, they want to stretch their limits, they want to go to places where angels fear to tread. And they're not interested in social convention per se. So, eventually, the focus is always on freedom, and hindrance to freedom is going to be a problem. They become very mentally combative and can be also very intuitive. An example of someone with a Promethean retrograde Mercury is Aldous Huxley, and Aldous Huxley was a futurist thinker and wrote the novel Brave New World. Now, keep in mind, energetically, Mercury is asexual and transgressive, meaning that it doesn't fall into that whole night female, day male sort of thing, which I intend to get away from as much as possible. And so, futuristic ideas, very Promethean. So, in Brave New World, Aldous Huxley's novel, and if you haven't read it, do read it. It's ideas of the future, and it's a very dystopian sort of future. Okay, other Chrissy Hind of the Pretenders, for example, is also an epimethean, Mercury epimethean retrograde. And then we've got Promethean direct. So about 40 to 50 days later, after the retrograde, Mercury will then turn direct, and it will reach its furthest distance from the Sun, which will be about 28 degrees. That's the longest in the elongation. Someone with a Promethean direct Mercury suggests a mind more at peace with itself and its environment, whereas the Promethean retrograde wants to fight against things, wants to resist, and wants freedom above all things, and wants independence above all things. This Promethean direct operates more like, say, Libran type of energy, is how I would put it. Promethean directs are driven by external, the social, real-world issues. Their drives, their issues, and personal experience are likely to be the reasons why they might do anything. Both types, both Promethean direct and retrograde, they're eager, energetic, they're intuitive, and future-oriented. But whilst the Promethean retrograde types tend to be more visionaries, they want to create, they want to break new ground, the Promethean direct types are generally more able to project their visions and ideas inspired by the Promethean retrograde types. So basically, these people are visionaries, but they are practical. They are looking at the way the world is and figuring out how that vision that they have in their heads can function in the world, whereas a Promethean retrograde type is not about trying to do that. They're trying to create their energy from their energy. And I will give you an example. So if anybody who isn't into RuPaul's Drag, what's wrong with you? Get into it. It's really interesting. And here's why. Because it got me into the Boulay brothers have a program called Dragula, and it's basically monster drag with drag kings and queens putting on prostheses. I mean, doing special effects makeup, rather good special effects makeup, costuming, all of it. It's just amazing. You get to watch drag kings and queens become wolfmen, monsters, creatures from the deep, ghost ships, ghosts. It's just fantastic. And the reason why I mention this is because that for me is very Promethean Mercury retrograde. They're interested in creating, not particularly in whether or not it translates to a certain group outside. You have to be inside that community to understand what's going on, and they're interested in expressing who they are and the issues of their life and their experiences through their art, which is drag art, okay? And so that is the difference between the two. They have, both of them can have future-oriented temperaments. So it's basically a temperament, and that's how that is. So the mind will still be intuitive, but it will be more discerning. It allows the ability to convince people of ideas, to inspire people with future-oriented, far-seeing visions, and also mentally intense. And some people can find this stimulating and inspiring, or very draining. So that is how I would put that down. Now, the Promethean direct type is like, it's on values. So, as I said, very Libran type of energy, because a clear set of guiding values and ideals is great for a Promethean direct person. So Promethean Mercury direct needs values and ideas to ground them. Otherwise, they get pulled, off of course. They get pulled out of themselves. Because they're trying to use those ideas, those visions to create concrete realities, okay? So people born during that time period, we have Franz Liszt, who was a composer, Al Gore, and George Sand, who was a famous 19th century novelist and liberated femme, okay? So those are the Promethean ideas. And those are the Promethean retrograde and direct. So what we're going to do now is step into the epimethean phase. Now the epimethean phase, as I've said, is during a superior conjunction at maximum elongation, meaning that the Mercury is at its furthest distance. It is increasing in speed, and at some point will overtake the Sun and be in front of it as opposed to dragging behind it. And it will reach about 28 degrees at its maximum. So it's going to be moving faster. It speeds up during the epimethean phase and will be faster than the Sun at some point, and eventually will be in a superior conjunction, meaning at its furthest point from this side of the solar system, be on the other side of the solar system, okay? So there are two phases. There is a retrograde and a direct, much like with the Promethean phase. So we're going to start first with epimethean direct, and that would be considered the third phase. And during, as I said, a superior conjunction, which can be analogous to an opposition on the full moon, so a bit more tense, with the ability towards self-awareness and illumination. And full moon is about weaving, meaning that you weaved something at the new moon, and now you're getting to see the results and decide whether or not those results are in keeping with who you are and what you want to put out there in the world. So, at the beginning of its cycle, which was at the inferior conjunction, so this is when Mercury is at its brightest and its smallest and at the most distance from the Earth. So for about 5 days after superior conjunction, Mercury appears as an evening star near the western horizon, setting shortly after the Sun. And during this time, we would discuss the mind would be more objective. It's very deliberate in how it operates. And about 40 days after the superior conjunction, Mercury's velocity will match the Sun in its daily motion because its velocity is going to reduce, after which it will continue to move through the zodiac slower than the Sun, okay? So at the time it reaches its maximum distance from the Sun, corresponding to a waning square aspect or a third quarter moon type or moon phase type, it'll be a high degree of mental deliberation. During the epimethean hemicycle, it is more of a the more associative and generalizing aspect of mind has a tendency to predominate during this time period. This mental type is characterized by a growing sense of long range, objective, and historical. So basically, they have a guiding star, a guiding point, an objective they're trying to achieve that's long range, and they have a historical perspective, meaning that they can look back to where they came from and assess, are they on track to get where they want to go or not? And due to the historical perspective, they can also sort out which things they're about to do, which will work more likely and which ones won't. Which ones are going to require fine-tuning and which ones won't. How likely am I to meet my goals based on this thinking, this mindset, and these actions that this mind is about to spit out and create? It symbolizes, it's eager, and it can be eager but less impulsive. So eager still, but those eagerness, that impulsiveness is tempered by the desire to be careful and to deliberate, very Saturnine in its energy. So calculated risks are more likely, intuitive gambles less likely. During the Promethean phases, in particular the retrograde, the eager, the impulsive, and intuitive gambles are more likely to happen because that's how those minds work. Whereas during the epimethean direct phase, you're less likely to have intuitive gambles happen. It's more likely to be careful, considered meditation on the facts and reflection on what worked and what didn't work before to see if we can still use those practices or if we need to change it up a bit. But a bit. And you're likely to see this type of Mercury in the charts of gurus, spiritual teachers, religious leaders, and things of that nature. Mercury type is epimethean direct, is practical, objective, and analytical. It likes facts and has a tendency to make decisions based on past experiences rather than hunches or gut instincts or gut feelings. It tends to be more well organized and it has the ability to manage people and to run things. Having an open mind and being rigid are challenges that are going to be constant challenges. They're going to need to be worked with this particular Mercury phase. So, and also very success-oriented, wants to fulfill plans and goals, is willing to delay gratification. See, it already sounds very, very Saturnine already. So, Karl Marx, Charles Darwin, Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, and J. Krishnamurti, and George, we're going to leave it right there because I just ran into a tongue twistery name and my brain is just like, I am not saying any tongue twistering names today. So, J. Krishnamurti are of the epimethean direct squad. The fourth face of the Mercury is the epimethean retrograde phase, and that is when Mercury is stationary and about to turn. Retrograde is about 20 zodiacal degrees ahead of the Sun. It is the shortest of the four types. It lasts only 10 to 15 days, and that means that 1 in 10 persons are born during this phase. During this phase, the Sun and Mercury move toward one another, but from opposite directions, and it culminates once again in the inferior conjunction. So it's starting to move toward that solar illumination, more self-awareness and things of that nature. So the fourth phase suggests a philosophical, more of an introspective mental temperament. It carries a sense of tradition, is never satisfied with knowledge that's secondhand. It wants first-hand knowledge for itself. It wants to see for itself. It's like Judas in the Bible. You know, the story in the Bible that talks about Judas. Judas wasn't satisfied. We're saying, that's Jesus. Jesus is alive. He said, no, man. I need to put my fingers on him. I need to put my hands on him and see that that's him. Oh, those are real wounds. Oh, shit. I believe now. So I'm thinking that Judas in that particular story was obviously an epimethean retrograde Mercury, because needed to put their hands on it. I need first-hand knowledge. I need first-hand life experiences. And to be fair, to be clear, I have a belief in that, because I believe that first-hand experiences, sometimes you need to have them yourself. That's why you can't give advice to people and feedback, because they need to see it themselves. They will not believe unless they see it themselves, okay? So this is the type of epimethean direct. This is epimethean retrograde, and so less interested in secondhand knowledge. They're the type to question authority and social systems and religious dogmas, presumptions, all of that stuff. They're interested in inner illumination. They're not interested in any of that, oh, I need, other people to tell me what to think type of idea. So during that last phase, it's contemplative, deeply introspective, and seeks inner meaning. It comes naturally and easily to these people to be able to be introspective and to contemplate. The person is interested in reason, meaning, and purpose behind everything, and will not be satisfied with quick and easy answers. They are insightful, but it's not a gut instinct. They didn't snap off with an answer, okay? An epimethean mercury retrograde, they don't snap off with answers. Their answers are carefully considered and through deep thought, okay? And so they have a tendency to process, I'd say, a little bit slower, which is why they don't just give you an answer off the top of their heads. So top people who have Mercury epimethean retrograde would be painter Salvador Dali, Jane Fonda, Madonna, Tina Turner, and Janis Joplin. And this is type of a soul discontent type thing. We're calling that this phase is common to people who are of a spiritual bent. That's not to say that the other types cannot be spiritual. It just tends to be that, according to Dane Rudyard and other astrologers, that a lot of gurus and spiritual types have this phase as their phase. Okay, so these are the epimethean and direct phases. And how it differs is, as I said, is that promethean are eager, they are impulsive, they are restless, and they're just going to get in there and do it. They're going to go by their first gut instinct, whereas the epimetheans tend to be slower in their thinking. They need to consider risks, they need to consider thoughts, so they're interested in calculated risks. They don't make risks, they don't take risks that they didn't give thought to. The last phase is the shortest, and about moving into an inferior conjunction, meaning that there's more awareness and self-awareness for this last phase, and they are not interested in following social systems or any of that. They're the social critics. They're the ones going, nah, that just is all effed up. No, 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 no. They're the types, okay? So that's the differences between them. So some of the challenges here is that sometimes for a epimethean retrograde, they may overthink things, overanalyze, wait too long, and may not be able to get into flow, because sometimes you have to flow with things, and so epimethean retrograde types have a challenge with that. So we're going to introduce a chart. It is Alvin Ailey. Alvin Ailey is a Sag rising, a sun in Capricorn, an out-of-bounds moon in Cancer with an Aries signature, meaning that when you add up all the energies in the chart energy is Aries. Aries, I want to be independent, I want to take risks, and that's just how I'm wired. Alvin Ailey was a dancer and a choreographer, has their own dance company, which is still in existence to this day, and Madonna studied at the Alvin Ailey Dance Company during her come up. Before she became Madonna, she was a student at the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. Let's give a brief biography of Alvin Ailey. So Alvin Ailey Jr. was an American dancer, director, and choreographer, and activist who founded the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater and created the Alvin Ailey affiliate American Dance Theatre and its affiliated Ailey School as havens for nurturing black artists, meaning artists of color, and expressing the universality of African American experience through dance. He fused theatre, modern dance, ballet, and jazz with black vernacular, creating hope-fueled choreography that continues to spread global awareness of black life in America to this day. His choreographic masterpiece, Revelations, is recognized as one of the most popular and performed ballets in the world, and once again, Madonna studied there as a student. And back in the late 70s, early 80s, when she was starting to rise up to be the Madonna we understand and know today. So we're going to start with figuring out how you find a Mercury phase, so we can find Alvin Ailey's phase. What you do is you find the Sun, and you're going to look for Mercury next. And if you go clockwise and you find Mercury, you have a morning star Mercury, meaning a Promethean Mercury. And then all you have to do next is look to see if it's direct, because it will tell you in the software. It'll have an RX underneath the degrees somewhere. Will tell you it's retrograde. Then you'll know if it's Promethean, direct, or retrograde. If it's epimethean, it is going to be counterclockwise from the Sun. So, hold on a second. My laptop is running very slowly today. But anyway, that's how you find it. Alvin Ailey is an epimethean retrograde Mercury. And his Mercury, hold on a sec, his Mercury is right in front of his Sun. At about 15 degrees. So the Sun is at 14 degrees in Capricorn, and his Mercury is at 15 degrees also in Capricorn in the second house, and that makes it, and it's retrograde, by the way. And so conjunct the Sun with Saturn in Capricorn at 14 degrees. So the tightest aspect in the chart that I see currently is between the Sun and Saturn. Saturn is at home in its home sign, so in its strength. The Sun is peregrine, but it's being helped by Saturn right next door in that tight partile alignment, also called a conjunction, with Mercury alongside right in front of the Sun and Saturn at 15 degrees, also in Capricorn and retrograde. That is an epimethean, so very introspective, intuitive, but kind of slow to share his thoughts and his feelings before with people. One of his greatest strengths is the ability to step back from a situation and to assess it calmly and to take calculated risks. This is epimethean retrograde, meaning that he's not a intuitive by the gut type of person, given that he is a person of color who was born in the and I forgot to share that, born on January 5th, 1931 at 5:30 a.m. in Rogers, Texas. So born during a time in the United States which was during the pre-civil rights era, and so would have to be very careful and calculated in whom he talked to and in what way, because coming from the South and being a person of color and a male person of color is still challenging, but it was even more so back in that day. So he would have learned very quickly to be introspective and contemplative about what he shared and when he shared. So his strength is to be contemplative and to self-reflect before making a decision. And social discontent would be major keywords for a Mercury epimethean retrograde, meaning that along with Tina Turner and along with Janis Joplin and Madonna, these people are not interested in the social fabric being in the way it is. They're the critics. Madonna, the whole point is to be provocative. Oh, you don't like seeing this? You're going to see it. Oh, Tina, you don't think I should be loud and sing strongly? I'm doing it. It's happening. I'm going to have my own show. I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to dance the way I want to dance, and I'm going to be like this, and if you don't like it, well, that's your problem. You need to deal, and strength. Janis Joplin, with that wild voice that she had at a time when women are supposed to sit around and be quiet, and she was definitely the antithesis of quiet. She actually acted more like a guy sometimes because she would speak out. She was very sexually comfortable with herself and in her skin, even though she had insecurity. So the reason why I mention this is because this is the type of energy that Alvin Ailey also had. Deciding to start a dance company for people of color so they could express themselves with more freedom and to be able to share their stories was a big deal, is a big deal, still a big deal. And that company is still rolling on long after Alvin Ailey left this planet is still amazing. It's still amazing. And so that Mercury is talking to a lot of planets. By the way, the rising is is Sagittarius, and let me get rid of that. So Jupiter would be running the show for the chart, would be the chart ruler. And let me check it out. Jupiter is in the 8th house alongside in Cancer, which is a sign of its exaltation, along with the moon and Pluto. So very intense individual. And they would have had to get very comfortable with grief and loss, and given that their identity was a person of color, coming up during a time when being a person of color was exceedingly, crushingly difficult. Learning to process grief and loss and heartbreak would be important. Because of the moon being in domicile in its sign, and Jupiter being exaltation, that is an opportunity for this person to be intuitive. By the way, your rising sign is who you are on the chart. So this person is Alvin Ailey would be very philosophical, would be enthusiastic, would be hopeful. You'd have to have hope to believe that you can make a change in the world through dance, through choreography, through art, which is what he did. Okay? So that is his, and he was, as I said, epimethean. So second house is of resources. And that doesn't necessarily just mean money. By the way, he made money as a dancer and as a choreographer and is well recognized as such in the dance world, which I came from, by the way. So I know his name and his work quite well. And that is resource. That's what you came in with also. This is also, generally speaking, strengths. So it's natural for him to step within himself and step away from social constraints to better understand what his vision is or what he wants to do or what he thinks. And he has an idea. He has a goal that he's moving toward. This is Capricorn energy. Saturn is alongside the ride by 1 degree. That means very serious, responsible, and I got an objective, I have an ambition, I'm moving in that direction, and that's pretty much it. So this is learning to work hard and consistently toward an objective that is long-term and requires a delay of gratification. Okay? And so how it adds to it, like I said, this is a person who would need to stand back, get quiet, and be alone while creating. This isn't somebody who could stand around in the tumult and the wildness. This person doesn't make decisions off the top of their head. They need quiet time to stand back and say, okay, this is the direction in which I want to go. And how it affects the chart, because it's also retrograde. Retrograde planets, they dance to their own drum. Absolutely. This is more of a kind of a D&D chaotic good thing, meaning they know what's right, they know what's wrong, they know what it's about, they know what they're trying to do, and they do not need outside assistance. He's very much aware of the tradition of the diaspora, the African-American diaspora. He's very much aware of those traditions and his ancestors. He knows where he's coming from, and he also knows where he is going. So, the way for this to work for you would be if you looked at your Mercury phase. Did it rise before the sun? Meaning that if your Mercury is at 15 degrees of Gemini and the sun is at 17 degrees of Gemini, you have a Promethean Mercury. If it is not retrograde, then you got a Promethean direct. If it's retrograde, you've got a Promethean retrograde. If you've noticed that Sun is at 14 degrees, but Mercury is at 17 degrees, you have an epimethean. If you look and see it's not retrograde, you have a direct epimethean. If there's an RX there, it is a retrograde epimethean. Okay? And so that's what you're going to do. You're going to look at that, and then if you feel like journaling or whatever you like to do to get into your chart or other charts, please feel free to do that. But it'll give you a chance to reflect on your Mercury phase. And thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening in today. I hope this was helpful and insightful. It gives you a little bit more depth and nuance into your chart. You want to understand those hidden factors. So thank you very much for listening and tuning in once again. And until next week, keep your feet on the ground and your head in the stars.